just another story of the same. You know, we're having a good time. But just be respectful, dudes, and never learn until it's too late. Okay. All right. What's up, y'all? Welcome back to another episode of the Baltimore Bureau Podcast. I'm Eze Jackson here with Dr. Khalilah M. Harris, Esquire.
It always makes me giggle when you do the whole, government plus
I like
student loan title.
You deserve all your titles, sis.
Listen, I earned it, and the way my bank account is set up,
right.
I'm going to use that title
You
everywhere.
Better.
At the supermarket, call me Dr. Harris.
Right, right. So we are here. We got 3 great video stories this week, and we're going to talk about a written piece. Shout out to Darna Noor, who is in St. Louis this week, and shout out to Baynard Woods, who is, what's Baynard doing this week?
Everything.
He's
Baynard's
all over the place.
Trying to see about the state's attorney's race and...
Oh yeah, so we are having election time right now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we have any of these stories particularly on the elections, but we did just finish early vote this week in Maryland, and our primary is on Tuesday. So stay tuned. We will be doing a live broadcast from Ida B's table on Tuesday at LBS, Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle's watch party. So that's going down from 9:30 to 11:30.
Yep. You should also stay tuned for some stories we've done from early voting stations, also about the state's attorney's office race that Baynard is working on. Jassel Noor working on a piece comparing the establishment versus progressive bona fides of the gubernatorial frontrunners, Rashawn Baker and Ben Jealous. And people should listen in to the reporting about the sheriff's race as well.
Yeah.
Sheriff Anderson versus Branford.
So it's an interesting time here in Maryland. I've been out talking to people at the early voting polls, just getting an idea of what issues have been driving them to the polls. That's been interesting. Stephen and Taya have also been out. Let's get into this first piece.
Yep.
This is Eddie Conway. For those of you who don't know, Eddie is one of our senior editors here. Also former Black Panther, and 44 years he spent in jail for a crime he didn't commit. So Eddie's show Rattling the Bars is rebooting, where Eddie goes into the prison system and exposes some of the realities that we might not see. So this piece here, Rattling the Bars, more arrests and jail time. Check it out.
I'm Eddie Conway, Baltimore native, former Black Panther, activist, and Army veteran. I served 44 years in prison for a crime that I was innocent of, convicted with no direct evidence, relying on a jailhouse informant's testimony. At the time, the government was operating an illegal COINTELPRO program designed to destroy the Black liberation and anti-war movements. The court eventually recognized the error of my trial, but by then it was too late. In prison, I was almost killed 3 times by guards, beaten unconscious, and left to die. I worked as an activist in prison and later with the Quaker program Friends of a Friend. What I witnessed firsthand in prison reinforce what I already knew. The prison system is not designed to reform people. It is not making our community any safer. The United States has 2.3 million prisoners, the highest percentage of incarceration in the world. The prison population grew by 700% from 1970 to 2005, a rate that has outpaced crime and the population rates. And this whole incarceration thing, and you go back to the 70s where you had jobs, you had industry, whether it was Fisher Body, Sparrows Point, et cetera. You had people leaving in the morning, going to work, and coming back in the evening with paychecks. So now, with that gone, in the urban communities, the citizens are locked up. In the rural communities, the citizens are locking those urban citizens up. And so you create a situation where you have jobs for one community, incarceration, or I call it imprisonment, for another community.
And so when you're taking African American men and women and also Hispanic men and women from the communities and they're incarcerated in those facilities, the facilities, for example, Maryland is under a state youth system where they actually make a profit off of having individuals incarcerated. And so we know that they make, for example, the park benches here in Maryland, they make the furniture and all of the state institutions. So the state benefits from having large numbers of individuals incarcerated in Maryland. Even when you step into the court with the bail bondsman, that's a profitable. Also, in terms of transfer services, if you're being transferred from the city to the state, someone is getting paid for that. If you're calling home on the phone, someone is getting paid for that. If you're sick and you need a doctor, a lot of times those areas are privatized as well. And so the medical system, that's profitable as well. If you are released on home confinement, the electronic monitoring, most of the times you have to pay for that. That's another service in which individuals have to pay for. So there's so many different levels. And even in some areas with private probation, you have to pay a fee to actually be on probation. So at every stage, there are costs associated with it that other individuals can actually get paid off. Even in terms of the food that's being provided, commissary, the high cost of the items that are available in commissary. And so again, at every level, people are actually getting paid.
Perhaps over 80% of the individuals in the prison system are in there for crimes of economics, selling drugs, protecting drugs, robbing, stealing, etc. Those crimes pale in the face of the systematic crimes by elites that exploits the entire community and takes away individuals' life choices.
And so what happens in these hyper-segregated cities, you have the hyper-exploitation of these Black communities, what a scholar called Nuliwe Rooks calls segronomics. And segronomics is basically, again, that weaponization of racial segregation, the withdrawal of resources, which is redlining, the predatory lending of resources, which is subpriming. So you have this catch-22 dynamic, redlining and subpriming, going on at the same time, and Black families can't get ahead. And that's leading to that economic stress that type of behavior is creating. This criminal, violent, invisible sort of violence is sort of feeding the street level violence. And I think that's the connection that we have to make, that the violence, for instance, the city planning department, they did a study showing that the predominantly white communities receive twice as much from the city's capital budget compared to predominantly Black communities here in Baltimore City.
I talked to a couple of former members of what the media refers to as gangs, but what I call street organizations, to get their take on what the prison system have done to them.
Caught 25 years in prison and felt like my family gave up on me. Everybody that I thought was my friend or associates that swore their loyalty to me kind of like cast me to the side when I caught so much time. So inside you feel alone, and it's kind of different because in other countries, like correctional officers are like social workers in a sense. They help aid you in your reintegration into society. But like in Maryland prison, most of the prisons that I've been in, it's a us against them mentality. Like, we're not looked at as human beings, we looked at as a number. Some of them, you have a few good ones that may really want to see you succeed, but they're not going to do too much out of their job description. And the system itself is structured in a way where they can't do much out of their job description. I've seen people in solitary confinement for years. Like, I've heard of people being on lockup for like 5 to 10 years. Me, myself, I was on there for 280 days. It's a sense of paranoia, but like, I think it's intensified by being over there that long and just sitting in a cell and not really having no type of programs or nothing that's really centered on rehabilitation.
I understand people look at jail and it's supposed to be a situation that they make for you to not want to come back. But the treatment, the way they treat you, we ain't even gonna talk about the food that they give you. Rats running all over the place, bed bugs. It's really not structured for reform in jail. It's no education no more. You can't go to college and get a degree anymore. Depending on where you are and what state you're in, you can't do anything but go to work.
Prisons are incubators for creating street organizations and drug abuse. In Pigtown, an area with a large white population in Baltimore, 30% of the area's residents live below the poverty line, and there's a high crime rate.
There's a lot of drugs on the street and a lot of homelessness, and I've only been jumped, thank God, once since I've been here, but that all rotates into, this, how you feel, how you're secure, how you're safe. They need more treatment programs for the drug addicts that are out here on the streets. The police don't make me feel any safer. Sometimes I feel more in danger with them around. I can be in danger with just this.
In East Baltimore, the statistics are similar, with a median household income of $32,000 and 30.5% of the population falling below the poverty line.
We got a lot of stuff built up in us. You feel me? And we go to prison, we be thinking that we could be able to get a little relief off, you feel me, and clear our mind, but we can't. Because the correctional officer, you feel me, no soap, no toilet paper, you feel me, there was no toothpaste, you feel what I'm saying? And some people don't got it. And some people don't give it, you feel me?
Like, it's not right. I feel as though it's too many guns out here. I have a 4-year-old son, and all my son know is guns, and that's bad. It's too many vacant homes out here for these homeless people. It should be more programs, like I said, for a mother and child like me. I'm a mother with 2 kids. I'm homeless. You feel me? I feel like they should have more recs out here for these kids.
Communities are not safer the more we incarcerate more people. In Baltimore, homicide rates have increased as mass incarceration has become the norm.
Many prisoners come out worse than they went in, and that's because prisons, by and large, prisons and jails, are sites where violence is produced. Violence is encouraged. Once the label of convict is put upon them, they're seen as second-class citizens. If we don't introduce a little bit of forgiveness, a little bit of understanding, a little bit more time and patience with our young people, especially our young people of color that we as a society demonize so much, we're not going to solve the problem in the long run.
You actually see in a community like this, actually people coming together to create something out of nothing. And that's actually what Black people have done since 1619. So Black people have been making a way out of no way. They've been putting together resources even when they didn't have ownership of themselves. This notion that Black people somehow, are at fault for their own predicament, I think is a highly troubling narrative that doesn't speak to, again, the sort of hyper-exploitation, the hyper-extraction of Black wealth, not only out of Black communities, but out of the Black body itself.
A large part of the extraction of that wealth from the Black community takes place through the prison system. On Rattling the Bars, every month, we will discuss alternatives to incarceration and solutions from community members. We will also look at prison policies and programs and their impact on prisoners, their families, and the community in general, and try to make a determination if those policies and programs make the community safer or not.
Crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, you hear Dr. Lawrence Brown in there talking about redlining and subprime lending happening simultaneously, breaking up communities, and that that intersection between those things happening to people who are trying to live their best lives and trying to adopt the American dream, and it feeding right into mass incarceration.
Yeah.
Right? I lose my home, I'm on the street, I gotta feed myself. Or Noliwe Brooks, that sister's book is awesome around segrenomics and how segregation is really a for-profit industry.
Yeah.
You know, this country thrives on that, and how all of those things work around and work to support mass incarceration really being propped up, which itself is also a business, right? You think about for-profit prisons and you know, Eddie talks about the way he was able to witness, the ways he witnessed being behind the bars and incarcerated, beating down people's mentality and their own sense of self-worth and importance, and how the system is not meant to reform anybody. It's not meant to rehabilitate anybody. It's meant to keep you in your place.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's nobody more perfect to do this kind of a show than Eddie. You know, I mean, he's really like taking it in and giving us the real. I remember a few years ago, I used to do mentoring up at Hickey, which is one of the juvenile detention centers here in Maryland. And we would go, me and a few other brothers would go on Saturdays and talk to these young brothers. And I had not realized until I started doing that how the juvenile detention centers are less about reforming these young people and more about preparing them for the penitentiary. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like when they get to the age after being in and out of these institutions and they become of age and they get charged, it's like going into the penitentiary is nothing new to them. It's not an adjustment. It's not shock value.
No,
it's like
you're ready now.
Yeah. And one particular Saturday we had to go in and explain to them how much money was being made. Like they all had on New Balances. You know what I'm saying? Like that was the standard issue shoe. You know, we had to be like, well, do you think these New Balance are free? Like, you know, like this is New Balance has money in this. You know what I mean? And you know, a lot of my work and a lot of my organizing and activism has been around the school to prison pipeline. I just talked with Dr. Santelises, the CEO of Baltimore City Schools, about a report coming out about how girls are pushed out in the school to prison pipeline. And it's like, you know, our people from cradle to their career in incarceration have a path set out for them by some people. And we need to really be able to recognize how those systems work together to put money in somebody's pockets. It's not the hood, but somebody's making money on our suffering. Yeah. When we talk about young people and how they're interacting with law enforcement, this next piece that Stephen and Taya did, I refuse to let the city sweep my son's death under the rug. This is an interview that they did with Greta Carter Willis, whose 14-year-old son was murdered by a Baltimore police officer in 2006. I remember when this happened. I remember the vigil outside of her house, and it's really a heartbreaking story. Just to warn you all listening to the accounts of what happened, but it's very important. So let's get into this one.
The lingering consequences of corruption in the Baltimore Police Department continue to haunt the city. Earlier this month, Sergeant Wayne Jenkins, one of 9 officers of the now notorious Gun Trace Task Force, was sentenced to 25 years in prison for robbing residents, dealing drugs, and stealing overtime. But the recent cases of corruption are only a portion of the controversial actions by police that residents say have caused lasting harm in the community. To understand the extent of what has occurred, The Real News is going back in time, talking to residents about their experiences with police. Our first conversation is with a Baltimore resident named Greta Carter. In 2006, police shot her 14-year-old son, Kevin Cooper, in the kitchen of her Southwest Baltimore home, while Miss Carter was holding her 6-month-old granddaughter in her arms. Here is her story of what happened that day, told in her own words. Just a note, there is a slight audio imperfection in the interview.
Oh my gosh, Kevin was awesome. He was a son. He was a friend. He was an uncle. He was a student. He had, lots of friends, and he really enjoyed sports. Football was one of his greatest games. He played football. And during the football, he won all kinds of trophies and medals. He played for the Gwynns Falls League, Little League, through Gwynns Falls. And he was just awesome, he just had fun. He just enjoyed life. And one of the things his dream was to be a quarterback for the Miami Dolphins. He loved the Ravens, but he wanted to play for the Dolphins. And he was an entrepreneur. He had his little snowball stand, and he sold little candies and potato chips, and he just was an all-around good person. Well, prior to, I lost my oldest son, Ronnie, in 1998, along with my sister's son and my cousin's son. So we lost all three of our boys in a very horrific car accident. So our household went from this happy household full of people, Kevin with his older brother, my daughter had just went into the military, that it was just Kevin and I. Went from, a married woman to a divorcee. And so it was just him and I. And Kevin was depressive because of the so many losses. One day you have your brother, your cousins, and your sister, and everyone in the household too. Now has turned into it's just him and I. So he was very, very depressive at that time. He really missed his brother, he missed his sister, and he missed his cousins. So he became depressive. On the day of August the 12th of 2006, Kevin, during the holidays and different episodes as he, thought about his family members, he would begin to cry and have little outbursts. So he was having a little emotional breakdown that morning. And I'm very active in the community. And so the police station is only a half a block down the street. I grew up with community policing. The police knew the community, and the community knew the police. So I called 911 to have an officer come just to have a conversation with Kevin, not knowing that the officer would ultimately take my son's life. On that morning, it was a little after 9, 2 officers arrived. Kevin had no shirt on. He had only on a pair of basketball shorts. And the 2 officers arrived. The one officer, he said that the call was abated, and meaning that the call was over, all was done, and he was leaving. The other officer said he was staying to get my information. So as you can see, our home doesn't have a back door. The exit to our home is down in the basement. So Kevin, when the 2 officers arrived, he was sitting out in the yard. And he was sitting down on the ground, and the officers spoke to him, and they spoke with me. And the one left, and the other officer said he needed more information. So I gave him my name, my phone number. What more do you need? Kevin got up from the ground, and he walked into the basement from out of the yard where the officer and I were standing by the back door. And as he walked past the officer, he was only 14, and he was mumbling. And the officer quickly went from asking me questions to zeroing in on Kevin. He walked up the basement steps. He followed Kevin on our first level, and he followed him upstairs on the second level. The entire time, my daughter's in the military, fighting for our country. I was in care of her young baby. She was only 10 months old, so I had the baby in one arm, and I still had my phone in my other hand. So I followed the officer, and I'm asking him constantly, why are you still speaking to my son? You should be having a conversation with me, not my son. So the officer followed Kevin upstairs, and he's bickering back and forth, you know. So I was like, sir, you're supposed to be talking to me, not to my son. He's a child. So he continued to have this back and forth jogger with Kevin, that Kevin wasn't tough, that he was tough, that the officer was tough. And he was having this back and forth, and I'm still asking him, please, you know, the situation has calmed down. There's nothing going on, so you can exit and leave our home. Kevin had no shirt on. He had the pair of shorts on. So he put on his tennis shoes because now the officer's inviting him, you know, to fight. And I'm, sir, why are you speaking to my son in this manner? Number one, you're not his father. You have gone from a police officer, now you're talking on a level with a child. Kevin came down the steps. Again, the front door is behind us, so I asked him to leave. He still continued to follow Kevin. Kevin walked into the kitchen and he picked up this plastic dustpan. And it's a little dustpan that you get from the dollar store that has the plastic at the bottom and this little plastic handle that you get from the dollar store. And he picked up that little dustpan. And when Kevin picked up the dustpan, the officer maced him and then he shot him. Oh my gosh, that was the worst day of my life. I think I was more in shock. I started screaming as to, why are you shooting my son? You know, you just shot my son. There was no words exchanged. He didn't say, you know, put down the dustpan. He just maced him and he shot him. Then he got on his radio and he started to call a signal 13. I started screaming, why are you calling a signal 13? Because you are the shooter. A signal 13 means that you're in distress. The house was filled with so many officers. They were just coming from all over. As they came in, they ran through the house. They were looking for a shooter. They were saying, where's the shooter? Where's the shooter? And I'm screaming, please get my son some help. Get my son some help. I could see his face grimacing. He was, you know, his eyes were already going up in his head because when he sprayed the mace, that blinded him. So as he was, you know, blinded by the mace, his head was going back and then he shot him. So he was still trying to recoup from the mace. The officers ran through the house. They started closing the windows as opposed to opening the windows. The mace out of the house. They started screaming to get me out of the house. And I'm still screaming, please get my son some help. They instructed me that I needed to get out of the house. So I went out, they escorted me outside and I sat out in the sidewalk on the gutter. My neighbors were coming and asking that we need some help. And I just was screaming, please get my son some help. When the ambulance arrived, I thought the ambulance was coming to get Kevin. The ambulance wasn't coming to get Kevin. The ambulance was getting the officer. The first ambulance, the officer came in the house. He went back outside, and then he sat down on the curbside. And as he sat on the curbside, the ambulance started tending to the officer. And Kevin was still inside the house, and I'm screaming, how are you tending to this officer, not getting my son some help? They was like, miss, please calm down. And I couldn't calm down because I knew my son was wounded inside of the house. I didn't know where he was shot. I just knew that he was wounded and he needed help. The second ambulance arrived. And when the second ambulance arrived, that's when they brought Kevin out. And I was just frantic. I was screaming and screaming. But there was detectives. I could see them coming with these suit jackets on, so I knew that they were detectives. And they said that I wanted to go to the hospital with Kevin, They said I couldn't go to the hospital. I had to go with them to make a statement. So not thinking, because it was just so chaotic and all taking place, I wanted to see my son. So I said, okay, I will agree to go with you down to the police headquarters if you would take me to see my son. They kept telling me that he was fine, he was okay, he was talking, that all was well. It's like minutes, I guess, were hours, and those seconds turned into hours, whereas I'm still thinking, that this is just like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, not realizing the time that had expanded. They said I couldn't use the phone, I couldn't call anyone, I needed to make a statement, and I gave them a statement. And at the end, they said that Kevin would be under arrest. And I kept saying, why is he under arrest? He didn't do anything. The officer is the one that was extricating all this situation, an already quiet situation. I said, this was the officer. They said, ma'am, that he struck the officer. I said, he never struck the officer. He said, to see my son. They said, your son is fine. He has charges, and we're going to take you to the hospital. So they instructed the officer to drive me to St. Agnes Hospital. When I arrived at the hospital, the first person I saw my pastor and I saw my neighbor. And as they were staring at me when we got out of the car, and the way they were looking at me, I just passed out. When I came to, they were telling me that Kevin never made it. They knew he was deceased, that the bullet had burst his heart, that he was deceased. So how are you telling me that he's talking, he's alive, he's well, he's going to be arrested for something that he didn't do, but you already knew that he was deceased? He had already died. So at that time, the doctor talked to me and he said that he didn't have a chance, that it had went and it burst his heart and he died on the scene. I didn't realize that he was gone by the time they had put him in the ambulance. By 2 or I think it was around 2 or 3 o'clock that afternoon, Baltimore City Police Department had come together and did a press conference. In the press conference, they said that the officer was justified. How could you justify a homicide that you never even did an investigation? A homicide that occurred that morning, how could you justify the officer's actions? I will never understand that, never understand that. I don't understand it to this day. August of 12th of this year will be 12 years of Kevin's death, and I still don't understand how could they say that the officer was justified. I wrote letters to every political person. We were in the middle of election year. Nobody wanted to touch the case. It was like this hush-hush, sweep under the rug conversation. Nobody wanted to talk to me or my family. So we sought the help of Mr. Dwight Pettit, the attorney. In 2007, in February, I received a phone call from the detective to say that the officer wasn't criminally charged. I knew he wasn't going to be criminally charged because the day of the incident, you already said that the officer was justified from taking my 14-year-old son's life. It has truly been a devastating experience. It has turned my family's world upside down. For 1 minute, you're right side up, and the next minute your whole world just goes toppling upside down, not knowing where to go, who to get help from, who to talk to, because it's like everybody don't want to have a conversation, from the mayor's office to anybody from the state's attorney's office. No one ever called to apologize for taking my son's life, just unjustly, just like a bag of trash that you just swept him under the rug. So I refuse to let this city just sweep my son's death under the rug. I've been his voice. a voice that has been crying out from the grave all these years for the truth to be told, that he had no chance. The officer was not in any type of danger. He was in no harm for him to take Kevin's life. This has been really a traumatic experience. No one offered me medical attention. No one offered my grandchild medical attention. I have been traumatized. They don't think about what this type of devastation does to families. I had to call my daughter in the military that's fighting for the country to come back to the United States and Baltimore City to know that your brother at 14, life was taken by a person who is paid to protect and to serve, not to take their life unjustly. So a travesty has been done to our family, and we have not received any justice in all these years. On September the 20th of 2017, I was at the Royal Farms down on Washington Boulevard. After the officer, Roderick Mitter, took Kevin's life, he was moved from the Southwest District Police Station. On that day, which he may never admit publicly, but in our private moment in the store, in that encounter, he realized in his heart that he did something that was not right. So as I said to him, I forgive you because I don't want God My heart has been so heavy all these years. And in order for me to have a peace in my heart, I forgave him for taking my son's life. And that's been the hardest piece, because that's all I wanted from the beginning, to admit that you did something wrong. That the police department, the city of Baltimore, has done an injustice to our family. An injustice to admit that you took my son's life unjustly. That's what I've always wanted, because it's not, my son is gone. It's to help other families. To this injustice will not be done to other families. Had they listened to us back in 2006, that would prevent a lot of things that's taking place now. You have so many families whose life has been taken and the police department has covered it up. Time after time after time, they have covered it up, swept it under the rug, because they feel that our children's lives doesn't matter. But they do matter, because they have families that love them. They have parents, they have homes, they have sisters and brothers. They were part of a community that loves them. And it's not their place to take our children's life unjustly and to cover it up and try to sweep our children's life under the rug like they did not matter, and they do matter.
What did the officer say to you when you forgave him? Did he respond?
He responded. At first, he didn't speak. He wouldn't talk. He just put his head down. I extended my arms out and I hugged him. I extended my arms to him. I embraced him because the heavy burden that has been on my shoulders, and I know he has been carrying a burden as well. He said to me that every time he closes his eyes, he sees my son. He sees my son. That's why I embraced him, to let him know, as Kevin's mother, You took my son's life unjustly in front of me. My heart is heavy. I forgive you, but God, you have to forgive yourself. And the only way to do that is through whomever you believe in. That's why I embraced him.
Did he embrace you back? I mean, how did he react?
It was very emotional. He embraced me back, and then he left quickly. He left very quickly. But justice will be served, because people don't realize things that we do, you can sweep it up before man, but you can never hide before God.
I gotta say, I teared up watching this because it's 12 years later, and I remember this was around the same time I was talking earlier about how we used to go into the detention centers, and me and Heber Brown, Pastor Heber Brown the third, we showed up at Miss Willis' home when they had a vigil for her son and everything, and just the dark. It was one of the most heartbreaking things that I had seen and endured. But it was interesting to see Stephen and Taya do this piece, because her son's death has been swept under the rug. And when you listen to her account of it, from the moment the other officers show up, the whole plan is to sweep this under the rug, cover it up, and make sure
it's not good.
We look out for the officer. You know what I mean? Just from the beginning, it's just like the son is laying there, the way they lied to her about him being okay, and you know what I mean? They don't want her to go straight to the hospital. It's just, it's one of the stories that really angers me, you know what I mean? And you sit and you watch the story, and I don't know how you can jump on a Blue Lives Matter wave, because that's just further perpetuating this kind of stuff. You know what I mean? Like, these are cowards. They are a gang. They are extremely corrupt. And we in our communities have to deal with the results of that. And so thanks to Stephen and Taya for covering that.
Yeah.
But
I mean, he was 14, Kevin Cooper.
14 years old.
14-year-old baby. And, Blue Lives Matter is if you're good people and you're good police, I don't understand how you engage in that whole line of thinking. I've had someone say to me, well, such and such was killed by a black police officer. What's the problem with the black community and the police? I'm like, them being black doesn't change them being a police officer.
It's a systematic thing. Like, it's an institution. Whether you're black or you're white, you are, and I say this all the time, you sign up to be a police officer. And I have a couple friends of mine who are police officers, and we don't, I just don't engage with them on this. But like, the reality is, once you become a police officer, you are signing up in support of white supremacy and systemic racism. Like, so it doesn't matter the color of the police officer, it's the badge and the institution.
Right.
This is a black man killing another young black man in his mother's home. And these officers don't show up to, figure out what went wrong, what happened. They're right away, the whole thing is covering it up and looking out for this officer.
Yep.
It's a damn shame. All right, let's get into the next story. The new Poor People's Campaign continues the work of the civil rights movement. And I think this is this week 6. Yeah, Eddie Conway has been going down to Annapolis with the Poor People's Campaign. And he'll be in D.C. this Saturday too. But let's check this out.
Welcome to The Real News. I'm Eddie Conway, coming to you from Annapolis. We're here at the Poor People's Campaign for the 6th consecutive week of rally, protests, and demonstration.
The late Dr. King said that it is a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself up by his bootstraps. How does one pull themselves up by the bootstraps if they have no boots?
And when white Americans tell the Negro to lift himself by his own bootstraps, they don't look over the legacy of slavery and segregation. Many Negroes, by the thousands and millions, have been left bootless as a result of all of these years of oppression and as a result of a society that deliberately made his color a stigma.
So far, there's been rallies and demonstrations in state capitals around 37 states and D.C. So I have with me today one of the people that's joining the Poor People's Campaign.
God, who is almighty and greater than human creation, we gather before you to acknowledge who you are and how you love, to accept the freedom and power that you give us to resist evil, injustice, and oppression in every place and at all times.
Obviously, you're not poor. I'm not poor. She's not poor. Why are you here?
Because we're one people. We all are connected in some way, and the plight of one definitely affects the others, and we're concerned about people. We're not just concerned about our plight or our fate, but we're concerned about the plight and fate of all people. And because all persons are created in the image of God, we must show up as often as possible to offer our voice and be a moral conscience to those who may believe that all persons are not worthy of a voice, or those who are marginalized should be left aside. We must stand up for persons at every level.
Is this liberation theology or something similar to that? Because I understand that's popular in South America, and it's been popular among a lot of people that read the teachings of Jesus Christ in terms of his involvement.
I think some would say that, and I think others would say it is what it means to be a believer, a follower of Jesus Christ, who was for poor people, who was a person who advocated for women and children and the oppressed, who did advocate for persons to offer their alms giving for persons in need, to be the, I don't want to say the good Samaritan, but to be that person who sees the need, not only is concerned about those needs, but is also concerned about transforming those systems that enable those needs to exist.
Okay, and I know you weren't around. I was around 50 years ago when Martin Luther King started this. Well, why do you think there's still a need for a Poor People's Campaign 50 years later?
Well, earlier this year, in April, around April 4th through the 8th, we were in Memphis, Tennessee, and it's very clear, I mean, even from the readings of Dr. King, it's very clear. He wrote a book from Where Do We Go From Here? From Chaos to Community, and in that book, he named the 3 triple evils, and they still exist: poverty, racism, militarism. And so as long as those exist, and as long as there's poverty, and as long as there are needs in this world that go unmet, we have work to do. And it is far beyond what is happening in one region. It's what's happening in the world.
It's hot out here, but it's getting hotter. It's getting hotter because the ozone layer is being depleted. It's getting hotter because our laws are allowing corporations to kill our air. It's getting hotter because we are a new and unsettling force, and we are taking back the power that we have. So it's getting hotter.
My way of trying to bring everybody together, and I mean everybody, I don't care what you look like. I don't care what your religion is. I don't care what your language is. Every single human being on this earth is indigenous somewhere.
So it's time for us to keep fighting. It's time for us to not to give up. It's time for us to follow what Martin Luther King started. And it's our duty to finish his job and to actually make history and change things, because we know that another war is possible and we can make it happen.
So these pieces...
Amazing.
Yeah.
The thing that resonated most for me with this one, and you see it throughout the Poor People's Campaign, and it has always been the case in terms of the presence of the faith community. But Eddie talks about the theology of justice and the intersections between, frankly, what would Jesus do, right? And that's not to say Christianity has been the only faith that's been working towards or working in support of the Poor People's Campaign. But when the pastor says, you know, Eddie's asking, you know, you're not poor, I'm not poor, what's the connection? It's like, we are one people.
We all are one people,
right? We need to have empathy, because there but for the grace of God go I. That could have been me living paycheck to paycheck, losing a job, or having to work 3 jobs to afford a 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom for me and my kids. And it's, you know, that fight for 15 gets pushed in there, but at this point, 15 is not even enough.
Yeah.
We're fighting for 15, and by the time people get $15 an hour,
we're going to need 20,
we're going to need $20,
yeah.
$25.
Yeah.
And, you know, the faith community has really been supportive of the Poor People's Campaign and driving it since its inception.
Yeah.
And, you know, you hear the piece from Dr. King talking about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. Yeah. It's like, but if I don't have shoes, you know, which strap would you like me to pull? And if you're stepping on my neck while I try to put my shoes on, what would you like me to do? And, you know, it's week 6, and you see people's energy building from week to week. Yeah. But we can't let up. Yeah. And, you know, I think Congress is going to go out of session soon for summer recess. A lot of legislation, you could get to the November elections. And we're going to be looking at what happens in the midterms related to people who are really expressing progressive sentiments, but what are you really doing about making sure people have food to eat? Yeah. You know, a place to live, like basic human rights. Yeah. And you know,
it's interesting to watch this election. You know, being at the polls and having worked so many elections over the years. And kind of stepping back from the insides of the campaigns, you know, and then now like just coming kind of from a media perspective and looking at just the atmosphere and the environment around these elections. And it's always just a little annoying to me. You know what I mean? Because you got, you know, people are trying to walk in and vote, and you got all these campaigns out there yelling at them, and the candidates are running around, you know, trying to give off their best pitch to everybody. You know, it's like I don't know, it's like walking through the swap meet in LA or something like that. You know what I'm saying? It's like, hey, buddy, come here, check me out. But
where were you before today?
Right. You know, and that's always a question that comes up when these candidates come in and run. But the other part that really struck me was the gross miseducation of voters. You know what I mean? And just like how much people didn't know.
You know
what I mean?
You have
don't know.
Mary Washington, who's going to be in studio today doing a live interview with Jessel Noor about her campaign for state senate in the 43rd. We have a candidate for delegate in the 43rd who's been accused of at least 5 instances of sexual assault, impropriety. Nobody talking about it. Not women, not men in the legislature. You have Mike in Annapolis saying we're not getting involved until it's done. And it's disrespectful to the voters who should have every bit of information necessary to help them make a good decision. When you think of the number of people who don't know what the Democratic Central Committee is and what it's supposed to do for them. When you think of the number of people who are the state's attorney's race, like all the numbers flying around about who tried how many murder cases and if they won and if they didn't win, and normally progressive people saying things like, well, this guy loses all his cases. He's dismissing cases. It's like, don't we want people to get a fair shake and their case dismissed if it's not a good case?
Right.
So what are we talking about here? And I think we'll see some of that in Boehnert's case. He's also been in the Keith Davis trial this week. Just listening to how politics and, again, mass incarceration, like the first piece, connect, and how it's in many ways intentional to keep people uninformed.
Yeah, if you're listening or watching and you don't know, Keith Davis is a trial. He was the first person shot by police after Freddie Gray. And this week had third mistrial.
Third mistrial.
Third mistrial.
The second mistrial. The second trial was there was a guilty verdict, but they found all kinds of mistakes in the case and then threw it out.
Yeah. So at this point, Keith Davis has been tried by like 60 of his peers, and they're still holding them. So this is what we're up against, what we're dealing with. In the same political atmosphere, we encourage you to check out Donna Noor's written piece she did this week about gubernatorial flood management. And this is another topic that's coming up in this race as it relates to climate change. Gubernatorial race what does the gubernatorial race mean for flood management, and just kind of holding these candidates accountable for future instances like what just recently happened in Ellicott City. And we talked about this before, so check that piece out. What else is going on? Again, Tuesday, check out our live coverage of the elections here in Maryland from 9:30 to 11:30 p. We'll be at Ida B's with Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. Next Wednesday, I'm taking The Whole Bushel live. If you ever watched my show, The Whole Bushel, that we would shoot here, and I would sit down to eat crabs with artists, which is a Baltimore thing we do. We are now making that a live experience, so you can go online and buy tickets and come and eat crabs and shrimp and hear some awesome live music. Brooks Long and Bobby Rush are performing. So that'll be a nice little, if the stress of elections has been bothering you at all, come hang out with us the next night.
If your people lose on Tuesday, come have some crabs, get your life. If your people win, keep turning up on Wednesday, get your life.
Yeah, come on and hang with us. We're going to go out. Anything else you want to?
Nah, I'm always glad to be here with you.
Yeah, me too. I really like doing this with you, clearly. We're going to go out with one of my favorite newest Baltimore rappers, D. Trinata. I know we closed with her last week too, but I just ran into her at Ida B's. And I'm not usually like a fanboy, but I was just
Come on,
like,
Black Girl Magic. Let's do it again.
Black Girl Magic. Her mom's was right there. Like I got to, tell her moms how much I appreciate her work, and we took a selfie together. She was like, "Let me take the picture." But shout out to D. Trinata. She's doing an amazing job. This is a joint with her and Take Kobang. Take Konada. This is one of my favorite joints. Thanks for rocking with us. As always, thank you to Dave Hebden, Stephen Frank, Chris DeMillo, Will Arenas, Dwayne Gladden. They all make this happen behind the scenes. Please.
Thank you.
Please donate to The Real News so we can continue to bring you real news, not influenced by corporate entities or any of that kind of stuff. So if you like what we're doing, send us feedback, but also send us checks too. All right, thanks y'all. We see y'all on the next one.
They can stop me, they can top me, they can copy, boom me, probably want MP4 because you gon' have to see my MP5 and MP8 will reload and empty more. And that's facts. Nada.